For most of 2017, the big story in Florida's residential real estate markets each month has been the continuing shortage of homes for sale on the more affordable side of the price spectrum. But as the latest housing market statistics from Florida Realtors reveal, the story in September of 2017 is quite simply all about Irma. There's a lot to talk about this month, and before I get to the housing statistics themselves, I'd like to provide a little context for them. On the morning of Sunday, September 10th, Hurricane Irma became the first major hurricane to make landfall in Florida since Wilma in late 2005. Yet, while Irma certainly caused significant structural damage in a few Florida communities, like one would expect from a hurricane of its magnitude, what really set it apart from other Florida hurricanes of recent memory was just how widespread its overall impact was. Although it struck the lower Keys as a Category 4 and came ashore on the mainland as a Category 3, for much of its life, Irma was a Category 5 monster among the strongest Atlantic hurricanes ever recorded. So even though its last-minute interaction with land in Cuba took its top winds down a notch, it still retained much of its size and energy as it approached Florida. This, in combination with its unusual path up the middle of the entire length of the Florida Peninsula, resulted in the exposure of every part of the state, save the Panhandle, to damaging winds, and brought about storm surge flooding in many locations up and down the Atlantic coast. To show you just how wide-ranging that damage from Irma was across the state, we put together a few maps using insurance claims data from the Florida Office of Insurance Regulation. This map shows the number of Irma-related claims reported for each county as of October 13th. I should note that there are multiple types of policies included in this data. Over 80% of these claims are for residential properties. Homeowner insurance accounts for about 2/3 of the claims. This data also does not include National Flood Insurance Program claims, so it underrepresents damage from storm surge flooding. Probably the first thing you'll notice is that the counties with the most claims are Miami-Dade, Orange, and Broward, all three of which were certainly impacted by the storm, but were by no means the most adversely affected counties. But the reason they have the most claims is that they are among the most populous counties in the state and simply have a lot more developed areas and structures. So to get an idea of where the damage from Irma was truly more intense, let's change the color scale to represent claims per capita. That is, let's divide the number of claims in each county by its population. There are probably more accurate ways to approach this, but this will get the job done for our purposes here. So, now we can see a better representation of where Irma had the biggest impacts locally. Unsurprisingly, Monroe County, which includes the Florida Keys and a largely uninhabited portion of the Everglades on the southwestern tip of the Florida Peninsula, has the state's highest claim to population ratio of about 1:3. In Collier County, the ratio is closer to 1:7, as is the case in Highlands County. In general, this map tracks pretty well with the path of where the strongest winds were present in the storm as it moved through the state. Of course, this map is incomplete since claims data are still being collected by the Florida Office of Insurance Regulation. We would expect areas on this map to exhibit a darker shade of red as more claims are reported. Now, that said, for every residential neighborhood or business location we all saw on TV or the internet that was submerged by flooding or decimated by wind damage, there were literally thousands of Florida neighborhoods and businesses where Irma's impact was limited to maybe some messed up landscaping, a downed tree here and there, and perhaps a few missing roof shingles. In other words, although Irma's impact was felt across most of the state, it failed to deliver anything resembling a knockout blow to the state's economy as a whole. Irma did, however, succeed in at least stunning the state's economy for several days, both before and after it came through. The angle by which Irma approached Florida kept most of the state in its forecasted cone of uncertainty until the last few hours before landfall, leading to widespread business and school closures across the state, some up to 3 days in advance, and the commencement of one of the larger evacuations that the state has ever seen. And of course, as Irma passed over the state, it managed to knock much of the state's power grid offline for several days and create a substantial amount of unscheduled yard work for millions of homeowners, all of which in turn hindered local businesses and dampened consumer activity. It should come as no surprise then that Irma had a negative impact on existing home sales across most of the state's local markets in September. As of the beginning of September, closed sales of existing single-family homes in Florida were up by 3.5% this year, but by month's end, this margin had been whittled down to just under 1%. The 18,030 existing single-family home sales that did manage to close in September marked a 20.4% decline from the 22,653 sales recorded in September of 2016. The picture was only marginally brighter for existing condos and townhouses. 2017 sales in this category were up by 4.5% through the end of August, but this gap shrank to 2.4% by the end of September, during which sales were down by nearly 16% year over year. Perhaps the most important thing to understand about this month's sales numbers is that these declines in real estate activity are not in any way indicative of a decline in the demand for housing going forward, or any other structural change, for that matter, in Florida's housing market dynamics. Rather, they are simply the result of the temporary economic downtime brought about by Irma before and after it passed through. We should expect to see similar temporary drops in restaurant and retail sales, job hiring, and other economic indicators at the local level. These are all normal occurrences in areas that have been impacted by hurricanes. Granted, home sales are a bit of a different animal than restaurant or retail sales due to the length of time that passes between the contract and closing dates, particularly when mortgage financing is involved. Most of the sales which closed in September were already under contract in August, well ahead of Irma's arrival. So in most cases, these are not really lost sales so much as they are delayed sales. If you think about it, if you account for weekends and for Labor Day, there were only 20 standard business days in September. If local government offices or title agencies or local community banks or any other parties required to get the necessary paperwork done ahead of a closing were shut down for, say, 2 days before and 2 days after the weekend of the storm, well then that's 20% fewer business days to work with right there. Additionally, many lenders and buyers requested that homes be re-inspected after the storm, adding even more of a delay to the closing process. While some of these closings may still have been completed by the end of September, many of them were likely bumped into October, and that's where our sales drop comes from. There is precedent for this sort of thing happening in Florida following a hurricane. We don't really have reliable monthly home sales data at the county level prior to the late 1990s, so we won't be able to take a look at Opal, Andrew, or earlier Florida hurricanes here. But we do have accurate data for the 2004 hurricane season. And the Florida Office of Insurance Regulation also happens to have collected claims data for each of the storms that impacted Florida in 2004, so we can take a look at their areas of impact as well. In 2004, Florida was memorably beset by 4 hurricanes. Charley was the only Category 4 storm of the bunch, and it cut through the state like a buzzsaw in mid-August. In contrast to Irma, Charley was much more compact. Some have described it almost as being more of a giant tornado than a proper hurricane. This is very evident on the map. There were very few claims filed outside the path of Charley's eye. Charley delivered some of the most locally catastrophic structural damage we've seen from a hurricane since Andrew, decimating numerous structures and wreaking havoc on infrastructure in Charlotte and DeSoto counties primarily. Frances came ashore near the Martin-St. Lucie County line as a Category 2 in early September. While it did not have the wind speeds necessary to produce the catastrophic sort of damage brought about by Charley, it was much less compact and it was slower moving, so it managed to impact a much wider area. Ivan was a large Category 3 storm that made landfall along the Florida-Alabama state line near Pensacola in mid-September and caused widespread damage in the western panhandle to homes and infrastructure, including numerous roads and bridges. And finally, there was Jeanne, which made landfall as a Category 3 storm in virtually the same spot as Frances. Jeanne was faster moving than Frances, however, so the higher winds near its core carried farther inland, but it didn't have as wide an impact from its center as Frances did. Let's take a look at 2004's monthly single-family home sales for the Port St. Lucie Metropolitan Statistical Area, which consists of St. Lucie and Martin County. September 2004 sales were clearly down significantly compared to 2003, and they were also down on a year-over-year basis in October, although not by nearly as much. The October drop is attributable to Jeanne not coming through until the end of September, however, as this would have disrupted the economy through the first week of October. Notably, the structural damage in this area was quite mild, considering that 2 hurricanes had made landfall in a single month. But debris cleanup and power outages can disrupt a local economy enough to have these kinds of temporary effects. The drop in October of 2005, by the way, that you see there, that's attributable to Hurricane Wilma. The damage from Ivan in the Pensacola metro area, which consists of Escambia and Santa Rosa counties, was far more extensive than what occurred in the Port St. Lucie area. Sales in the Pensacola area fell by nearly 50% in September 2004 on a year-over-year basis. Yet, this impact on sales was a mere one-month blip. Sales were back up on a year-over-year basis in October. The only metro area to really feel long-term pain from the 2004 hurricanes was the Punta Gorda MSA, which consists of Charlotte County. The damage that Charley did here was lasting enough that sales did not recover by the following year. It's difficult, however, to separate the impact of Charley versus the decline of sales related to the housing bubble after 2005. All of these examples are strong evidence that Florida real estate always has willing buyers as long as the lights are on and infrastructure is back in place. In parts of the state that are already back to business as usual, we will likely see a similar rebound in the October numbers. New listings and new pending sales were both down by roughly 30% in September, both in the case of single-family homes and also in the condo townhouse category. But we can expect buyers to become active again soon if they haven't already. Remember, much of the housing shortage we're facing in Florida is due to high demand from people who already live and work here, as well as newcomers who have come here due to a robust job market. Most Florida businesses are likely already back to the hiring pace they were at before Irma came along, and we will quickly bounce back to handily outpacing the nation's rate of job growth, just as we have for the past several years. And these new workers will join the ranks of the already large number of workers who want to buy homes. This is why median sale prices continued to rise in September by 7.6% for single-family homes and by 8.1% for condos and townhouses. Now that you're up to speed on the statewide impact of Irma, be sure to take a look at the statistics for your local market to see how they compare. As always, you can find these statistics and a plethora of other useful research and analytics at floridarealtors.org/research.